Could the next Xbox run Windows? So recently I made a video about a potential Xbox handheld as discussed by the head of Xbox, Phil Spencer. I talked about how given the low sales of the Xbox hardware ecosystem right now, the disproportionate number of users who are buying a Series S as opposed to the more powerful and expensive Series X, and quotes from Phil himself, that it seemed to all suggest that an Xbox handheld is on the way, but also might be running Windows. And then I ended the video talking about how maybe the next Xbox console, proper console, could run Windows. Many felt the need to tell me that Xbox already runs Windows. And yes, I know that. Many people know that. It's actually really common knowledge. The Dreamcast also ran a version of Windows. I didn't think I needed to say this, but since it's the internet, I guess I do. Obviously, I was talking about the proper full Windows operating system and not just a version of it designed specifically for Xbox hardware. The suggestion I put forward was that this Xbox could boot into a menu that's better suited for controller usage, then allow people to also switch to the traditional Windows desktop. Just like PCs today, you could use this with a controller on a TV with an HDMI out, no monitor required, play it on a couch, no problem. And the benefits of this are pretty obvious, right? I mean, it's an Xbox that can play PC games, PlayStation games, everything else. You could upgrade your machine every few years, no need to wait for new hardware to drop. Backwards compatibility, no problem. We got forwards compatibility, because your games get better as your hardware gets better. You have more options. So will the next Xbox run on Windows? No, it won't. First of all, I am a bit biased. I want Xbox to move to Windows proper, because I don't love these closed ecosystems. I felt that ever since 2013 or so, consoles have really lost what made them special. And now, yeah, they do feel like little more than mid-range computers, admittedly sold for lower than mid-range computer prices. This isn't to say that I don't still use consoles or see a use for them. I still care about them, care enough to make videos about them. The specs inside an Xbox Series X are actually quite decent for what you would get for a mid-range PC. It's not top of the line, nor is the PlayStation 5, but it is significantly better than what you would find at a store for $500. Additional optimizations allow for consoles to have better performance in games than even a PC with these on-paper specs could ever, perform at. For most games. And many have wondered, what if a Windows computer had this level of power for this price point? It would change the entire PC gaming ecosystem. In fact, it would change the PC ecosystem. In tech, in federal regulations, it probably will not happen. The reason consoles are cheaper than PCs is, one, because they're sold for a loss, or at least minimal profits. When a console manufacturer sells a console, they can sell it for cheaper than it costs to make because that money can be made up from accessories, game sales, subscriptions, and all of that stuff. And by having an Xbox run Windows proper and allowing users to buy tons of things outside of the Xbox ecosystem where Microsoft doesn't get a 30% revenue cut, it just doesn't work financially. Yes, Microsoft makes Windows, but they don't receive a cut of every single transaction done on the Windows platform. If we look at basic statistics, it seems pretty likely that if an Xbox computer were made, most people would spend their time playing games on services that Microsoft doesn't make any money from. But the real big issue here would be its effect on Microsoft, on Windows. A $499 Windows machine with the specs of a Series X would be great for consumers, but it would piss off every single third-party PC manufacturer. These companies just couldn't compete. Why would anybody pay $1,200 for a PC when you could get similar specs with a $500 Xbox? Even if Microsoft decides to increase that price to make a profit to $600 or $700, they're still selling this for way less than the other manufacturers. And they can do this because they can produce more of these units at a larger scale, which will decrease the cost to make each individual unit, and they don't have to pay licensing fees for the operating system that they already own. The primary market for this sort of machine at these costs would not be the gamers. It would be other companies, enterprise, This would be the cheapest way to buy a mid-range PC. Why go for the $1,000 Dell when you got the $500 Xbox and both can run Microsoft Office just as well? Not only would the third-party manufacturers revolt, but you'd probably see some FTC decisions, suggestions to split Xbox from Microsoft, because this would come off as incredibly anti-competitive. The Xbox brand wouldn't be able to support itself financially. The publishing software side, that could make some money, but the hardware, those losses would just be eaten up by Microsoft. With no expectation of profits, just a gain in market share against companies that kind of help them already. And look, Apple could get away with this because Mac OS isn't that big. Not as many people use it compared to Windows, so it's not a monopoly. Microsoft does have its own hardware division, as many of you know, the Surface team, which is rumored to be working on the next Xbox. But the reason Surface works in this Xbox would not is pricing and market. The Surface is pretty expensive, and it's a touchscreen computer. By costing a lot of money and having a very specific use case, it is not selling all that well. Your average mid-sized company is not looking at the Surface products and deciding, hey, that's what we need to go with instead of just the average computer. If you start to put all of this together, the only way you're getting an Xbox PC is if it costs $1,000, $1,200, and it would still run games worse than whatever a PlayStation 6 would be, and it couldn't be upgraded. PCs are big. Graphics cards, those are big. If Microsoft uses custom chips and proprietary tech like it does to make these consoles so small, you would be left with a box that can't be upgraded. Now, if it was only a few $100s, the price of a normal game console, consumers would be fine with this. But once you start talking about a $1,000 computer that cannot be upgraded, nobody's happy with this. And there's other issues as well. Compatibility. We haven't seen OG Xbox games, Xbox 360 titles, or even some Xbox One games make it over to the PC. It's unlikely that many of these games will ever see native PC ports. It's possible, sure, but more likely Microsoft will try and move people and these games over to the cloud. Yes, this isn't ideal and I wouldn't like it one bit, but even this probably isn't gonna work out so well. Not every Xbox game is available on the cloud. Even most games that you've purchased are not playable on the cloud. It's usually more limited to just the Game Pass games. For most console users, this would just result in them losing most of their library. So what does this mean for the Xbox handheld? Could that still run Windows? I said in my last video I thought it probably could, and it might be the only way it makes sense, but I'm starting to think that that won't be the case. I think my take was entirely skewed from my personal preferences. While I think that there would be better alternatives out there, better portable consoles than something that's just a portable Xbox, there are at least a few million people who would be willing to buy something like this. There's at least a few million people who are continuing to invest in the Xbox ecosystem, the Xbox consoles as their primary platforms. And while I don't think anybody expects the Xbox console division to grow too much over the next decade or so, that doesn't mean that there isn't money to be made. You could also argue that an Xbox handheld is a defensive tactic. Nintendo showed that there is a significant market for handhelds even today. And while I don't 100% believe the rumors of a PSP 3, if they are real, Xbox could have a real problem on its hands in a few years if this thing drops and they don't have any Xbox alternative. I mean, let's try and think about this from the perspective of somebody just entering gaming for the first time. Somebody who's not attached to any of these ecosystems, that doesn't have a library built up. If they're not going with the PC or Valve's offerings, and you only have Nintendo, Microsoft, and Sony to choose from, Microsoft just seems like it's becoming the weakest option, and they need to reverse that trend. Game Pass might be the big selling point here and now, and a handheld coupled with that could be pretty enticing, especially if they hit the right price points. A portable Xbox Series S equivalent, for example, might not be all that expensive by 2027. And while it might not sell 100 million units, it might not give the Nintendo Switch 2 or a potential PSP 3 a run for its money. It would at least give incentive for existing Xbox fans to remain Xbox fans, and possibly function as the new secondary console for Nintendo or PlayStation users looking for a Game Pass machine. At the end of the day, PC gamers are going to stay on the PC. An Xbox branded PC isn't going to change anybody's opinions on, well, anything. Console gamers will still stay on the console and the PC users will stay on the PC. but most wouldn't be willing to pick up a weird custom box from Microsoft that can't be upgraded. And Microsoft wouldn't be willing to potentially destroy their company just to do it.